Okay. This is part two, talking about multimodality. And we're going to talk about just one example of how multimodality works. This is a splash page from a webcomic called Girl Genius. And I want to talk about how different elements seem to create one image, but in actuality, maybe it's not the image or the rhetoric that we think that it is. Now, you have this image also in content for this week. So if it's easier for you to just pull that image up, if this is hard to see, feel free. Um, so at first glance, this appears to be a very feminist comic. Um, and there's a variety of reasons for that. Number one, let's take a look at who's standing in front here. Okay, she's obviously standing in front of him, placing her front and center in the image. Also, look at their facial expression. She has this very kind of cocky smile on her face, whereas conversely, he kind of has almost a pout, and she's looking straight at you, whereas he's looking off to the side. Um, Look at their weaponry. I mean, she's got carrying a giant wrench here, right? And in fact, if you look closely at the wrench, at the head of the wrench, you can see that it's a dinosaur head, okay? And not only is she carrying it, but she's carrying it one-handed, okay? In fact, if you look closely, you can see her pinky's kind of up there, okay? Um, Whereas conversely, he has this kind of thin little sword, right? Um, Look at the color pattern that's used. Um, we have for her, if you look in the background here, we see this blimp, which is this blimps typically you think of as like a gray or a darker color, but hers is actually pink, okay, which we traditionally associate as a more feminine color. Which actually is it's an interesting story. That just happened a lot more recently than you would think. Um, the uh, it was driven by the toy industry. Used to the colors used to be flipped. It used to be men were thought to wear pink, whereas women were thought to wear light blues. Um, Also, if we think of comics, right, we tend to think of women in uh, more revealing clothing. The heroines are oftentimes in these tight jumpsuits, right? Um, or that are revealing, low cut. She's covered all the way up to her neck. Sleeves go all the way down. This has got to be some kind of wool, right? I mean, it's some type of very heavy, thick material that so she's covered completely. And just the title, right? The title tends to indicate who your lead is. Okay, Girl Genius. So, um, first appearances here, the multimodality seems to indicate a very positive pro-feminine viewpoint. But let's take a little bit closer look. Let's take a look at how, in a lot of ways, this pro-feminist message does get undermined in a variety of ways. Okay, um, let's just start with the title. All right, Girl Genius. When we think about a girl, right, somebody who is a girl, we wouldn't think of somebody. I mean, Agatha here. This character's name is Agatha Heterodyne. Agatha's been in college for at least a couple, maybe 3 years. Okay, so if there was somebody who was in college that was male, right, we wouldn't call them boy genius, right? In fact, if we think of boy genius, most of you probably grew up with Jimmy Neutron, right? That's what they called him, boy genius. He was like in elementary school, okay, lower middle school at best. That's a boy genius. But here we have somebody who is in college being referred to as girl genius. And quite frankly, why do we need to identify her by gender at all? Why do we have to call her girl? There's got to be a better way to refer to her. We could just call her genius, right? She's a genius. Um, which means that essentially what we're having to do is label her or put her in this infantile position, which is something that we do all the time with women, right? We make them, we infantilize them. We call them girls when in fact they are women. We don't tend to do that with males, right? If we call an adult male a boy, it's a put down, right? Um, and again, let's take a look at her appearance. Now, at first, like we said, she's covered, right? Goes all the way up to her neck, all the way out to her arms. She's wearing these heavy layers. But let's take a look at the actuality of her position, okay? Um, Starting with just the way that she's standing. Now, it seems very confident, but at the same time, it is overtly a sexualized position. We have this massive popping of the hip here, right? In fact, an almost physically impossible popping of the hip, which would undermine any type of balance she would have trying to hold that giant wrench, okay? And this is designed to accentuate the curves, okay? The other thing that we see that is definitely curve accentuating, and it's really kind of interesting, you look at what she's wearing, right? This nice, heavy, thick wool, and yet we have underboob here, right? Not only underboob, but heavy underboob with shadow underneath. If you're wearing something that's that heavy, you might get some contour up top, but you're not going to get contour all the way around, and certainly not down underneath like that. So really what you're getting here is this attempt to over-sexualize Agatha in ways that don't conform, quite frankly, with physics. The other interesting thing about this comic is while it has this very supposedly pro-feminist message that does get compromised quite a bit, you end up with this other website that is linked to their site called Triple X Xenophile, which is another comic by the same characters, which is basically hardcore porn. So you have this dichotomy between the message that they are supposedly trying to convey and then how that message is consistently undermined by the actuality of what they're doing. So be very careful as you're creating your multimodal compositions to think about how you want to consistently convey your messages. Think about things like color, like texture, like hue, and how those are going to work. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great day, guys.